Hello, welcome to a new batch of us trying different things. This show is called Bears Boldly Go, or Boldly
Y-
Going Bears is a working title, where we
Yeah,
are going to be reviewing the Star Trek films
yeah,
in order.
in order. Yes,
Don't know if you're
yes.
going to get these regularly, it might be rather sporadic, but here's one. We're going to be looking at Star Trek the Motion Picture today. The
The
what
first
I always
film,
describe. Pardon?
the first film.
Yes, and a
Mm.
film I always describe as the good kind of boring.
Yeah, I'd go with that as well. Yeah, I think this was all spurred on, because obviously at the time of filming this, episode 2 of season 3 of Star Trek Discovery has just aired. So Star Trek's in the air at the moment anyway, and during this strange year, with a lot of time in our hands, my wife and I have been making our way through the whole of Star Trek in universe chronology.
Speaking
Uh,
of strange years,
mm,
and just going out on a non-Star Trek related tangent for a
mm,
moment, but people at home might like to know how weird we are. I
mm.
had the weirdest craving the other day.
Go on.
I don't know if it's lockdown induced, but it's like, God, I really wish I could go and stop in a travel lodge or a Holiday Inn or a Premier Inn, a budget
Yeah,
hotel.
no, I feel the same. Like, because
Yeah,
we one of the regular little walks that we do just to like get some fresh air, is just down the time, because
yeah.
I live like literally a minute and a half, 2 minutes walk from the time. So we walk down the time. There's a lovely little cafe, about a mile away.
Yeah.
And so we potentially go there, get a little takeaway coffee, or they sell like basic groceries as well. Like we realized that we had no cheese the other day, so we went and got some cheese. But on the way back, there's a row of hotels on the Newcastle side of the time, and one of them's a travel lodge. And I just felt, you know what, I just want a night away.
I
Like
it,
I like
I
even
want
though
to
it's like
book.
literally over the river, I would quite happily just go and have a night there.
Yeah,
Just
I would like to book a budget hotel
yeah,
room,
yeah,
take a phone and my Switch,
yeah,
and just go lie in the hotel room bed and play video games. Which I can do at home.
yeah.
But,
You see,
but
I want one that's got a fair to middling hotel restaurant as well, because I want the experience of having the okay meal. It's not bad. It's not great. It's just, it's I've got what I've paid for in a hotel.
perfectly fine.
A
Uh,
perfectly fine
perfectly
meal.
fine breakfast.
Yeah, that's what. Yeah, I mean, like obviously the breakfast would be fine, but like the like an evening meal, almost like I've done a
Yeah,
long day of travel, and then we have the evening meal, which is okay,
I
and a glass of the glass of whatever the house red is that is not like offensive, but also not good.
I stopped in. I think it was one of Ibis's
Mm,
budget city
yeah,
hotels. For ones where it's like this is the bare essentials, but it's clean.
yeah.
Uh, to the point where such the bare essentials that the shower is in the
Mm.
bedroom.
Oh,
Yeah, the toilet had its own door and
yeah,
like cubicle, but the shower block is just
yeah.
next to the bed.
Wow,
Yeah, but
that's weird.
downstairs they had
Mm,
a wonderful snack station.
yeah.
Just it wasn't vending machines; it was just shelves and shelves of snacks you could buy. Didn't they do food? But lots of snacks.
How
It was a
weird.
nice hotel. It's well, I say Manchester. It was in Salford. I stopped
Mm.
there when I went to see Carly Rae
Oh, and
Jepsen.
yeah,
But yeah, we've we've tangented on our
gone on a
desires
huge
for
tangent.
hotels
Yeah.
enough.
Yeah.
So Star Trek: The Motion Picture.
Star Trek: The Motion Picture, yeah. So as I said, like in this crazy time, my wife and I we've done the entire proper in-universe chronology. Oh, we haven't done it all yet. We're only into TNG at the moment, but so the other week we smashed through the Star Trek, the first 6 Star Trek films, so the
And I
Kirk
think
ones.
you talking about them gave me a desire to potentially watch them
them again. Yeah, as you can see, I've got them both on the lovely DVD box set and the more recent Blu-ray box set.
I own the Blu-ray box set myself.
Aesthetically, I prefer the DVD box set. Obviously, the Blu-ray does offer better video quality. Not necessarily better sound quality, as we were discussing off camera before. This is from the DVD era where they just mastered getting good sound in it. So it still sounds stunning, absolutely
The motion
stunning.
picture has some good sound as well.
Oh, it's got some incredible sound, including the birth of the what we now think of as the Star Trek theme, because this was the first film where Jerry Goldsmith, who many of us probably think of as the Star Trek composer, even though really he's done relatively little in the Star Trek pantheon, got his hands on Star Trek for the first time properly. Famously, he turned down doing the TV series, but he recommended the composer who actually did do the music for the original TV series. So this was the first time you got to experience that theme. Some wonderful, wonderful music in this film. Amazing sound design as well, with all these like incredible, strange noises of the giant V'Ger. Obviously, you probably know what the story of this film is. If you don't, we will be making some spoilers in this, as we always do. So if you're not up for that, go away, go and watch the film, enjoy it, don't enjoy it, however it is, come back and then enjoy the rest of this discussion. But yeah, so the film itself is, as with actually a couple of the rejected scripts for this film, it's essentially a remake of one of the original series episodes, where they come into contact with what turns out to be an ancient, for them, Earth deep space probe. In this case, Voyager 6, which in the Star Trek chronology was launched in 1999, which it didn't, obviously, in our universe, but in the Star Trek chronology launched in 1999, and at some point was lost in space. So, James.
First off, there's a weird reading of this film where Kirk is a terrifying villain. Like, you could almost read the film like he arranges a series of accidents to take command of the Enterprise again. Like he creates a teleportation accident that kills a couple of people. Like, all to get. He doesn't, but Kirk at this point in the franchise is an admiral.
Yep.
And he does not like being an admiral.
No, I mean this is set real time in the future from the end of the TV series. TV series finished in '69. This came out in '79.
Enterprise is a long-serving ship.
Well, I mean, at this point, it's had 5 years under Robert April, 5 years under Pike. It had 5 years under Kirk, because obviously they did finish that off in the animated series as well. And then another, so it would have been another 8 years, maybe, at that point, in between the end of the animated series and this film. So the the ship itself is 25 years old at this point. So it's not a young ship. It's been through a lot. So it's having a huge refit. Yes. Which is why the transporters aren't necessarily working very well, and they do unfortunately kill some people.
But basically, for Star Trek nerds, the Enterprise is a Constitution class vessel,
mm-hmm.
and they're basically refitting them into a brand new class.
Yeah.
Constitution refit class.
Exactly. So, excuse me. So the benefit of this is that obviously this is the first film to have the absolutely stunning models that we became accustomed to in this kind of era of filmmaking and television making. Obviously it became famous with the likes of Star Wars. I don't think it was Industrial Light and Magic that made this model, but they did make the models for subsequent films and television series.
There's a famously gratuitous shot where near the start of a film, Admiral Kirk has decided for this mission to just find out what's happening with this mysterious object that's heading towards Earth. He's going to take command of the Enterprise. So Scotty gives him a shuttle ride around of the
refit.
And it goes on forever. But man, is it a gorgeous model.
I mean, it is forever, and yet at the same time, as gratuitous as it is, it completely deserves it. The craftsmanship that went into creating that model, and then again, like the filmmaking involved, like the cinematography involved, because as big as that model would have been, it probably would have filled a good sized living room. It's still shooting on what's essentially a miniature. So to get the quality of movement, to get the range of movement that they did to do all of that, it would have been really impressive.
This film was pre-Star Wars,
No, it's post-Star Wars.
Post-Star Wars.
2 years after Star Wars, yeah.
But I would say this is a lot more inspired by 2001: The Space Odyssey than it is by Star Wars.
Yeah, and very deliberately so. They and I think the producers did discuss this, I believe.
Yeah. And after this film, I think the Star Trek films do follow a more action-oriented route.
They do, but they're also they're
very much their own beast.
They're still very much their own beast. It still feels sort of. I mean, I've finished all the Kirk films now, and in my rewatch, and what is striking is that Star Trek feels very much. Yes, it's its own thing. It certainly hasn't embraced too much of Star Wars. Final Frontier has an element to it. There is definitely a Tatooine ripoff in Final Frontier. But everything else feels sort of grounded in a way. There's a realism to the fantasy. Like, this is very much science fiction as opposed to science fantasy. And therefore, it still sticks almost to the original idea of it being closer to 2001 than it is to Star Wars. So I think going into this rewatch, I did expect to experience a certain level of incongruence between motion picture and then the rest of the films, and yet actually, especially considering there's one of the longer gaps between the two films, between Motion Picture and Wrath of Khan.
Yeah.
The style differences actually aren't as big as you think they are. They do work together. They do follow on from each other actually really quite nicely. And the it reminded me very much like of the MCU, and we did toy with the idea of this series of Bears Going Boldly or Bears Boldly Going or whatever being part of our Before the MCU series, because in the same way that the MCU films to me feel as magic and as mystical and as huge, and they deal with big space aliens and this, that, and the other, they almost feel grounded in a way. There's a certain level of realness to them that Star Wars is more about magic, like
Yeah, Star Wars
real
is
magic.
fantasy.
Yeah, Star Wars is a fantasy film.
Although those parts of watching this,
Mm.
when I kind of realised Star Trek is nearly just as it's a different kind of mystical. But when
It's
you
a
have a
different kind of
Vulcan,
yeah.
when you have a
Mm.
Vulcan homeworld
Mm.
and they're performing their rites and their logic,
Mm.
and yeah, there's a lot of it's Star Wars is straight up magic in space.
Mm.
Star Trek is magic dressed as science.
But then I think with things like, obviously you were talking about the Vulcan,
Yeah,
like because one of the early scenes in this film is Spock on Vulcan. He seems to have given up his life in Starfleet at this point, or at least temporarily,
yeah,
and he's trying to get like the full Vulcan badge of being Vulcan, basically, like
yeah.
a fully realizing logic. And I mean, Star Trek sometimes is very obvious with what it does, and sometimes it is slightly less obvious. But like Star Trek, all the different races of aliens are, or species of aliens, sorry, are very much informed by different races and different cultures right here on Earth. So Vulcans are quite obviously some sort of East Asian culture, and so Vulcan logic is quite embedded in probably Gene Roddenberry's perception of what Buddhism would have been. And so now, which East Asian culture? Not sure, because obviously Romulans being the twins species with Vulcans. It could be any interpretation really of Chinese, Japanese, Korean between the three of them, between the two species. They all have their own interpretation of Buddhism, as do Star Trek. The Vulcans and the Romulans interpret their histories, their shared histories. So I think it's very much the mystique in Star Trek. Yes, is a scientific mystique, but it's also it's sometimes more of a religious mystique. So it isn't magic in as
It's a religious
such.
right of Vulcans
Well, I
that
mean, yeah, not just in the Vulcan ones, but I mean there are
yeah.
other like kind of more religious mystiques. Like in the original series, they touch on Greek mythology
I think
and all sorts of things.
the thing that the reason it might feel potentially they're more magical than it is
Mm,
because the future Star Trek presents is one where Earth is very much given up on religion. Like people from Earth don't seem to have a faith anymore. So then, if you show a Vulcan religious
mm,
right
yeah.
in a future that's being presented as religionless,
Mm.
it maybe that's not the right word, but it feels more mystical than it potentially
Yeah,
actually is.
but then I think, like, obviously, I mean, it's something that's touched on in various. I mean, when we get to Wrath of Khan, we'll talk about it a bit more. But by the time Earth actually gets its warp drive and it meets the Vulcans, it's had at least one World War III, because the timeline does change a little bit. But yeah, it's had at least one World War III, which was a nuclear-based one, and the eugenics war as well, which some interpretations of was absolute mass genocide. So the chances are that maybe religion was eradicated. That because even like obviously a lot of people turn to religion in their darkest and most desperate times, but potentially these wars were so horrendous that when God didn't answer their prayers, humanity kind of gave away well, they lost their faith. Excuse me. So like yeah, it's I think this film's a nice one in that it does what Star Trek does sometimes, in that it gives you a peek into something that they maybe will never talk about again. It gives you that little window into a much wider universe, and a much bigger universe where there are strange and wonderful and incredible things. Because obviously in Star Trek, it mainly takes part in 1/4 of our galaxy. So as far as space is concerned, the tiniest drop in the ocean. And yet obviously there's still such variety within that tiny little quarter. Whereas this, V'Ger disappears into what we used to call a black hole, according to Spock, and came out somewhere different in the universe, and was found by a planet of robots, or planet of artificial intelligence. A machine planet.
They actually call it the machine planet, which makes me kind of think Kurtzman is a fan of this film, because there's a lot he's doing in Star Trek right now that I feel is seeded here.
Yeah, I mean that's it's because obviously with Disco they've been dealing with artificial intelligence.
Yeah, the second season dealt with an AI that got out of control.
And then Picard similarly, and they've alluded to a great, terrifying species of machines that come and cleanse.
Somewhere deep in deep space.
Which so
could be the same place Voyager got to, or V'Ger.
Yeah, V'Ger. Yeah. So yeah, it could very well be that we actually finally get some follow-up to the motion picture.
This is the one time these uniforms show on screen.
Yep. Actually, one of my favorite uniforms.
I absolutely adore the uniforms from the rest of the Kirk films. I like the red tunic.
Yeah.
And I know that's the uniform that we see going forward as well, because I imagine that uniform lasted in Starfleet for quite some time, because Picard wore it.
Well, one of the things that they said when the creators said when Disco was released was that the reason that their uniforms are different to what would have been on the Enterprise, and obviously when we do see the Enterprise in season 2, it is a different uniform, is because Starfleet had a much more kind of open uniform policy at that point. So it was also kind of heavily based on what your ship's purpose was. So
the other thing they mentioned was it depends how long your ship's been out there, like because you're traveling deep space, right?
Yeah.
What could have been the uniform at one point
might have changed.
May have been updated, but you've not been back home in.
Yeah, because obviously in the original series era, the Pike era, the Disco era, ships were significantly slower. They had to accelerate through the warp drive. I think I've also read in previous like rather nerdy books and things like that, that the warp speeds that are in Next Generation are actually significantly faster than the warp speeds that were in the original series. So they literally changed the scale as well.
Yeah.
The ships that were in the original series era that have different uniforms and things, as you say, they could have been in deep space for a hell of a long time, and just literally not made it back. And they didn't have replicators in those ones either.
No.
I think they had a primitive form that could replicate certain materials, but not necessarily food and things. And they also had what I'd completely forgotten, but with the rewatch, they did have a very primitive holodeck in the original series. But yes, so this film, very grand. It's all
Yeah.
about scale, and again, I think it's Star Trek going. Look, we have a budget, and with the advances of
I think you know how
model
we
work as
all
well.
accuse Insurrection of being a
Mm,
feature-length Star Trek episode as
yeah.
opposed to a Star Trek film.
Mm,
This also feels like a feature-length Star Trek episode, but it's just a lot more successful at it
yes.
than Insurrection was. Maybe
I
because
mean,
this feels like a good feature-length episode, while Insurrection feels like a feature-length episode of a not so great TNG episode.
mm, I think that's like again. I finished my run of the Kirk films earlier in the week, and I'll say every single one of them feel like a feature length episode,
Yeah,
to different degrees. And the big thing is obviously that they have more money, and they have and with that more money, they've got a better ability to make better looking sets, better looking models, and make it feel like a film. And I think that's the thing. Thematically, they are exactly the same, and I think that's more a testament to how good the quality of writing and the ambition of Star Trek itself is, so that
yeah.
even in the TV series where they might have a limited budget and they might have to do cut some corners here and there, the ambition of the episodes story wise are usually quite grand, but they have to find ways around it. Whereas, like obviously in the films, they've got that bit of extra cash to play with. Um,
I think this is more turned into us nerding out about Star Trek via
mm,
the frame of a motion picture, but
mm.
I don't mind that.
I think the thing is
Before,
that it's one of the ones that like it's visually stunning, and
yeah,
as I said before, like the music and the sound design and everything like that. Character wise, it offers a bit for Kirk, and it gives you a bit more backstory for Spock and a bit more understanding, like of what it is to be Vulcan. Like even just that tiny little window at the beginning, like it just shows you that little bit more. But plot wise, actually, there's not really a huge amount to talk about. Like I think when we get onto the other films, we'll be able to dissect them a bit more. But I think it's a very important film because it did. I think it was the right film at the right time for Star Trek. As much as it is often forgotten, it almost never seems to make it onto TV. I think
no,
like
I think many. I feel in recent years it's had a bit of a rethink.
mm,
People are rethinking how good it actually is.
yeah,
But for years, it has been considered one of the bad ones, and that Star Trek films got good with Khan.
mm,
I disagree with that.
I completely disagree with that, and I
I
think
do think this is a very good film, as
mm,
long as you're in the right frame of mind for it.
oh yeah, I mean you certainly have to be in the right frame of mind for it. I think, as you said though, I mean like Kurtzman does seem to be a fan of this,
Yeah,
and I think that's possibly why watching it this time I've enjoyed it more and I've got more out of it than I've ever. I mean, I've always enjoyed this film. I think the first time I watched it, it was
Same.
quite late. I think I was in my 20s by the time I actually finally watched this film. That's how infrequently it was on TV.
Yeah, I've never bought into the thought that it's bad. I mean, I'll be perfectly honest. There isn't a single TOS film that I don't enjoy watching. Even Final Frontier.
I mean, when we get to Final Frontier, we'll talk about that. But again, I mean, it's like I've been scoring these in my head, and even Final Frontier didn't score that badly. So, on
if someone
that,
asked,
go on.
Pardon?
Go on.
If someone asked me to watch for TNG films, I could happily watch Generations and First Contact, and then just stop.
Yeah, it's sad. Yeah, but, I mean, eventually we'll get to them and we'll talk about them.
Yeah, but, for various reasons, I enjoy all the original series films.
I think there's a nice progression to them. I think it does help. I think it does help that in a way, because the TV series just finishes without because it just got cancelled. And then obviously most people haven't seen the cartoon series, which is well worth watching. It is most definitely the continuation of TV series.
They're doing because the animated series is only year 4. They're doing a year 5 in comics at the moment.
Oh, interesting. Cool.
They're doing it TV show style as well. They've got a writer's room.
Yeah.
And they handle different arcs. So one arc, they're coming up with the overall flow together.
Yeah.
And then one arc will be written by one writer. Another arc will be written by. They've got a showrunner who's shepherding the whole thing. I haven't read any of them yet, but I think it's a fascinating idea.
I might have a read of that when it's finished.
Yeah.
And just blast it in one go. But anyway, as I say, I think because unlike all of the other Star Treks, except for Enterprise, the original series never got a satisfying conclusion. There was also never really a proper through thread. Like it was very much a villain of the week kind of thing with the original Star Trek. So these films, even the lesser films, offer some character advancement that you don't necessarily get to see in the TV series. It gives you a satisfaction in a different way. So even like Final Frontier, where the film itself isn't great, you get to see more of like the progression of character relationships and things like that. Yeah. So like they serve a different purpose to what the TNG films served. So on that note, James, we will bring out our patented cold light of day scale. And where would you place this? So for those who haven't seen it, Cold Light of Day, the most average film ever made. Not good, not bad. It is so right down the middle that it is quite possibly the worst film ever made. Because there is nothing memorable, either good or bad. So that sits exactly on our the number 3 in our 5-point scale.
I give the motion picture a 4.
A 4.
I
completely agree with you. I don't think it's perfect. It certainly doesn't deserve more than a 4. As we said, I think there is a plot issue here in that it doesn't necessarily have much of one. Yeah, it doesn't really have one. But the way that it does actually expand that idea of character, it does make Kirk look like a much more flawed individual. Like it's quite a brave move to make him almost the villain.
Has to be the start of his, and people talk again about the trilogy of these films, right? Wrath, Search, Voyage.
Yeah.
But I think Kirk's arc starts here.
Oh, it does.
At his most egotistical, and this film doesn't really teach him any lessons.
Mm,
It's the next film then that humbles him.
mm. And I think that's why some people don't necessarily like this film, because it doesn't teach him any lessons. It doesn't really teach many of them any lessons. Spock learns something.
Spock
Obviously,
learns that his human side is probably something he shouldn't dispose of. Yeah.
Because obviously, when coming face to face with pure logic in the form of V'Ger, he sees the errors of pure logic and realizes that he has to embrace emotion. Spock actually cries in this film from feeling pure emotion. So, if anything, actually, this is Spock's film. In a way. But I completely agree. 4 out of 5. It is, when you're in the mood for it, it is actually a remarkable film, and very much a film of its time. An incredible study to watch for special effects and visual effects. And because obviously now pretty much everything is CGI. I know there's been in recent years a bit of a resurgence of practical effects, and when the right team makes them, practical effects nowadays are phenomenal. But none of these practical effects that we get to see now, like BB-8 or something like that, would exist without the practical effects of films like this. So it is well worth watching. And of course, the birth of the what we now think of as the Star Trek theme.
So yeah, we'll see you all soon, guys.
Yep.
I'm not very good at the hand thing, but live long and prosper.
Yep. Peace and long life.
Significantly better at it than me.
Kapla.